This is the second in the series introducing my latest restoration project, 1973 Suzuki TS50, aka the Gaucho. And in the first episode I shared with you how I acquired the project, some of my initial perceptions and discoveries. I ran the engine for you a little bit, etc. In the second in the series, I'm going to get a little more depth about what my plans are, some of the parts I've started to acquire, and my thinking going forward. But before I get into any of those details, I did want to share with you the service manual I recently acquired for the project. I've discussed before that one of the very first things I usually do when I buy a new project is buy a service manual for it if I don't already have a service manual that covers that model. I did not have a service manual for this bike. This came from New Zealand. I have bought from this supplier before. He is a top-notch supplier of quality service manuals. Took about 2.5 to 3 weeks to get it in the mail or the post, and I can't recommend this guy highly enough. Now, as it turns out, apparently Suzuki didn't actually produce a true service manual for the TS50. So creatively, what this supplier did is he took service information from other similar models of the time and compiled them together and created essentially a service manual, which I think will be quite serviceable. And again, I can't recommend him high enough. And if you're looking for a quality service manual, you won't go wrong buying from this person. Again, it came from New Zealand, as you can see there. 2 or 3 weeks and I had it in hand. Let's talk about some of the other items I've started to acquire here. Obviously, you can see I've got a whole engine here on the right. This cylinder and cylinder head came with this engine. This engine did not have a piston though. Piston and rings, boot for the air cleaner, and then the sprocket cover, and I'll come back to those later. One of the things I discovered is that cylinders for this bike, at least cylinders that haven't been bored over to the second oversize, are hard to find. You can find them already bored over to that second oversize, which is not what I wanted, because that's what I already have, and I already talked about the issues that's created. So I went looking for a cylinder, couldn't find it. And in addition to that, the original head on the bike, the cylinder head, someone had already put a helicoil in the spark plug hole, repair the threads of the helicoil, and they didn't do a very good job of it, I don't think. So I wanted to replace the cylinder because I wanted to do a fresh bore, and I wanted to replace the cylinder head, and the only way I could find that was to buy the whole engine. And in reality, I bought the engine block, which is complete, except for the piston, of course, cylinder and head, for not much more than just cylinders already bored over were going on eBay. So this is a stock bore cylinder, and the head has not had a helicoil put in it. So I'm intending to use these two items along with the new piston and rings to replace the current cylinder and head on the bike. The lower end right now is just extra, and if I end up needing parts later on as I get into the project, I certainly have the parts available there that I can salvage. This is a first oversized piston. It is brand new, as you can see. It does not fit, as it shouldn't, because this is a standard bore. So we've got the piston and the rings to go with it right here. I will take that up to my machinist, my local machinist. He's done all my machining work for me. I do have the equipment. I have a lathe that is capable of boring this, but I don't really have the setup for it in terms of fixturing that I would need. Someday I might do that, figure out a way to set it up. I might even take that cylinder off the TS50 right now someday and experiment with boring it. I have boring bars. It's just fixturing it would be the problem. So I'll have this board. I will clean it up. I will have him bore it. I'll paint it. When I'm done, it'll look brand new. So these parts are easy to get, by the way. The pistons and rings are not a problem. The air boot, this is becoming a bit of an international project. The air boot right here is an NOS part from the UK. Here is the original, here in my right hand, and it's very brittle and hard. And this is the NOS part. Again, came from the UK. These almost always get hard and shrink over time. And if you look at it carefully, you can see, if I align everything, you can see the ear boot, the original has shrunk. And again, that part number is used on multiple engines, and I had to, it was listed under a different, I think it's listed under AS50, to be honest with you. But it's the same part number the TS50 used. This sprocket cover, these are kind of rare. They're almost rare as hen's teeth. This is off originally a TS75, but looking at photos and comparing part numbers, this is the correct sprocket cover for the TS50. And in fact, I did fit this to this engine, and I fit it also to the bike, the project itself, and it fits just fine. There's a little, I think there's a little dimple right here that I can get out pretty easily, but other than that, it's straight and it attached real easily, so that will be restored and refinished in the proper colors. So those are some of the parts that I've already started to acquire. Again, this is going to be a replacement for the current piston and rings that I think are oversized or don't fit right, and we'll just use the engine block for a spare. So next we're going to go over to the bike itself. It is up on the stand, and we'll get in a little bit more detail around my thinking in terms of the approach to the project and some of my other discoveries that I have found that I did not discuss in the first part of this series as we prepare for beginning the teardown for the restoration. I have the bike set up on the stand. I've got it at its lowest position outside of being on the floor. I thought I'd talk through a little bit of a few things that I've discovered. I already mentioned that the fender has some stress cracks in it. You can probably see that right there. Those have been welded. It's worse on the left than the right, but there's stress cracks on both sides. And it was welded pretty decently on the bottom side, but that'll have to be repaired before it's repainted, of course. The front forks, the lowers are chrome, and they do have some scuffs and mars on them, so those will end up being re-chromed. The sliders, fortunately, which tend to be a challenge on these older restoration projects, the sliders are in very good condition. As I indicated earlier, I don't think this bike has seen weather to speak of. I think it's always been in a dry environment. And that has served these sliders well because I think they can just be cleaned and reused. I don't think I have to worry about, at least at this point until I get them apart, doing anything further with the sliders themselves. The wheels, the chrome on the wheels, I haven't really decided what I'm going to do there yet. I might end up having them re-chromed. The front doesn't look too bad, but once I get the tires off the wheels, I'll get a better sense of whether I have to have them chromed or not. But they're not bad. A few very, very minor scuffs that might polish out. Not sure yet. Same really conversation for the rear. The handlebars and the controls are in average shape for their age. The chrome, you can't see it from this perspective, but the chrome on the handlebars is shot. It's flaking off. The handlebars appear to be relatively straight. I don't think they're bent, but I'll have to check that in a little bit more detail later, but certainly at minimum they'll have to be re-chromed. One curiosity is this VIN number. Let me see if I can zoom in there for you right there. That VIN number tag right there, it's one of those vinyl tags. It's not metal. And it appears to me that it's come loose and someone has glued it around the side of the steering head. I've never seen one applied in that orientation. Usually they wrap around like that, the steering head. They don't sit flat. So I suspect that's been reattached somehow, probably with adhesive. I don't know for sure until I get in there, but that's my initial blush. You can see the wiring here, the sleeving, pretty consistent throughout the bike. The sleeving is going to have to be replaced. As I also indicated, some of the wiring works, some of it doesn't. I know the horn doesn't work for sure. And I'll have to go through all the wiring anyway and re-sleeve it and clean it up and repair it. Back to the front tires. They are originals, but again, I can get those, so I'm not too concerned about it. They're very significantly weather checked and cracked, And for a rider, that would probably be fine. Put new tubes in it and call it good. But for restoration, I don't think so. I'll replace those, and they are available. There's not a lot to talk about on this side of the engine. Again, this cover right here was replaced. Apparently, Suzuki offered those covers in two different, I don't know if that was colors or glosses. One was called a luster, and the other was, I don't know, non-luster, I guess. I'm not sure about that. I'm not an expert on that, but I'll have to investigate a little bit further. I think this model came with a low luster or no luster cover, and I'm not real sure where that fits in, that grouping. The one on the other side seems to be a little bit brighter, but that's a different cover. I don't know if it's NOS or not, but the previous owner installed that. And you can probably see here the foot peg on the left is also bent, just like on the right side. That's one bar that goes underneath the engine, and it's not unusual for those to get bent back kind of in that shape from being dumped and run into berms and that kind of thing. So that's pretty easily straightened, a very common situation. Side stand looks okay. This bike, I believe, does have an option for a center stand, as I understand it. It didn't come standard, but you could at the time get it from a dealer, and that's, I think, what that, you see that little hole right there, and that little boss on each side, I think was for an optional center stand. And of course, that sprocket cover that I talked about a few minutes ago that I bought that the previous owner couldn't find fits right there. That oil leak I alluded to in part one is right underneath there, and eventually it's not significant, but it does weep a little oil over time. Rear shocks will have to be at least restored. You can see the paint on the coils, which are black, will have to be redone. I've never taken apart this small of a Suzuki shock. I did take apart the shocks, if I recall, on my TS-185 and rebuilt them. I did manage to get them apart, I think, a few years ago now. Side cover here, underneath that side cover, I believe is where the tools are stored. Right there. Side covers are in very good shape. They're not cracked. At least I haven't discovered any real damage to them on either side, for that matter. Ignition coil, typical wiring. I think the toolkit fit right in here with a strap, probably. That's just my supposition based on having dealt with these kind of bikes in the past, or these older motorcycles in the past. Chain I already talked about. I don't think it's right. It's clicking when you roll it. And he said it was a brand new chain, but it was made in the Far East, not Japan. And it's an off-brand. And he said he spent a minimal amount of money as necessary to put a chain on it, and it's just not right. The sprockets aren't bad, so I don't think that's the reason the chain is clicking. But I will get into that in more detail a little later. And again, the chrome on the rear wheel isn't too bad, but we'll have to inspect that further as well. The fuel tank, is in pretty good shape. It does have a couple of dents in it. One right, you can't see it of course, but there's one right here. And I think there's another one over there on the right side. But it's reasonably in good shape, and I don't think there's any rust through or anything, but it does have some dents that will have to be repaired. And certainly the fuel cap is original, I'm sure, to the bike. Actually, that's in real good shape for its age as well. The taillight housing, the previous owner just painted that with a silver paint that he said did come on the bike. I don't know what it looked like before he painted it, of course. It's probably just showing it wear and tear, but it looks like it's intact and doesn't have any significant damage to it. The fender itself, the rear fender here is plastic, unlike the front fender, which is metal. This does show some stress cracks up underneath there that from age and being used, that will have to be repaired before the fender is repainted. Let's go around to the other side. A moment ago I talked about dents. There's a dent right here. And it's a fairly large, it's not deep, but it's pretty large this way across. and there's a dent right here that probably doesn't show up on the camera. So those are the two significant dents. I already talked a little bit about the motor. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. Petcock I'll rebuild, have a new boot to replace this radiator hose. The Kickstarter and that mechanism seems to work just fine, as well as the shifting of the transmission. I will pull the engine, of course, take the side covers off and get in there and look around a little bit. In terms of this side cover, it just covers the oil tank. As you can see here, nothing really special about what's underneath there. He uses a synthetic oil. By the way, I didn't mention this previous, but the person I bought this bike from is a Suzuki only guy. He had a garage full of Suzukis. He said he doesn't traffic in any other Japanese brand. He's had a few over the years, but he's specific to Suzuki's. And he uses a synthetic, I think he said this was AMSOIL, two-stroke synthetic. I also use AMSOIL two-stroke synthetic. I think he uses a different type because mine is clear. His has got the blue-green tint to it. The exhaust system seems to be fine. Just doing a quick once over it, there's no major damage to it that I could find, or dents at this point. Once I get into it, of course, I might find something, but it does seem intact right now. I think the oil pump is over-oiling unless he's got a mix in it. I know I didn't. I added a little fuel and I didn't put a mix in it. It's got straight gas in it from me. But it does seem to be smoking a little excessively, especially if he's running a synthetic. So I think the oil pump isn't adjusted just right. We were underneath the seat a bit earlier. Just a couple other things I want to add to. As I mentioned, there's some stress cracks, and you can see some hazing here, I think, in the paint, as well as there's some stress cracks here. And I don't think these fasteners are original. Those don't look like original fasteners to me. And there is some cracking here back. Let me get a better shot of that for you. There is some stress cracking right here, as you can see, that will have to be repaired. The most significant thing I've discovered under here is there's a plastic inner fender here, and you can just see part of it right here, this black, that goes underneath like that and curves down. That's been repaired with duct tape. It looks like it's in pieces. It's severely damaged or cracked, stress cracked, something's going on, because there's duct tape under here that wraps around underneath and holds that inner fender together. So I'll either end up replacing it with a good used, or I don't know if it's repairable. It probably is repairable if you want to put the time into it, but I'm not sure right now until I get into that. But that's probably the most significant thing I've discovered so far that I really wasn't aware of until I started looking the bike over in a little bit more detail. Certainly the seat pan can be repaired, restored. It doesn't look like it's got any rust through. There's some surface rust, of course, very common. The bumpers are all in place. I don't know about the seat foam, of course. One thing I didn't point out on the other side of the seat is was a rip, like right here on the opposite side, that had been repaired with one of those home do-it-yourself vinyl repair kits. And it's an okay job in terms of maintaining the integrity of the seat, but it doesn't look very good. And that is on the opposite side. I didn't mention that. But I think the seat pan for sure is salvageable. Maybe the foam, I've probably have salvaged much worse foam than what. So that's a quick review of where I'm at, my thinking and my plan of attack for this project. Again, could this be a decent survivor? Yes, you absolutely could do some minor maintenance. You could probably even run the engine the way it is, even though it's rattling. Maybe clean up the electrics a little bit and get everything working, and it would be a fine survivor. I don't debate that with anyone. However, that's kind of not my thing, and I already have 3 or 4 riders that I can ride around the yard, so I don't really need another one. And what I really like to do, my interest is in restoration. So this bike is going to be completely broken down over the coming months and weeks, like I normally do. and right down the last nut and bolt, except for the engine block itself. I probably won't have to get into too deep into the engine, but it'll certainly be cleaned up, rebored, and piston rings, etc. We've already talked about. Some of it will be re-chromed as necessary, seat recovered, repainted, on and on and on. So it's a relatively easy project, I think, at this point, but I need to qualify that. You will always run into things you didn't expect when you get into a project. Absolutely, you can rest assured, like that cracked inner fender there that I just talked about on the rear, inside the rear fender. You'll always run into things you didn't expect. I think parts are reasonably available for this, especially the non-engine parts. You get into the cylinders and heads, that seems to be a problem, but most of the rest of it I think I can find okay. So we're going to begin the breakdown in the next series of videos, and I will keep you appraised and bring you along for the ride as we go. I'm going to bring this video to a close at this point, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.